Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Do you ever feel like you just don't have the time to sit down and read the news every morning? Sometimes things get so hectic you can't even scroll through your feeds while you're trying to get ready. A podcast from Boise State Public Radio has you covered. I'm George Prentice, and I want to invite you to check out The Connector every weekday morning. You can get up to speed on all of the Idaho news you need to start your day without ever interrupting your morning routine. All you have to do is hit play. That's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. The city of Boise is once again wrestling with the question of how to keep people safe on its streets. Last week, an 8-year-old Boise girl was struck and killed at the intersection of Harrison Boulevard and Ada Street. An informal memorial was held this past Saturday at the intersection where that accident happened. And our Morning Edition host, George Prentice, joined neighbors who came to grieve, to remember, and to try to find ways to heal.
At the scene of what was a tragedy on November 11th, hundreds of people, neighbors, strangers, mothers, fathers, and so many children found one another this past Saturday evening at the Boise North End intersection of Harrison Boulevard and Ada Street. It was at that precise location that an 8-year-old girl, her name is Maura, was struck and killed by a pickup truck. This past Saturday, people came from near and far to be in the company of one another, to grieve, to remember, and with some hope to heal.
There's a group of moms who all have third graders. There was a collective sense that we were all grieving.
This is Shayla Diaz. She helped spread the word about the memorial, and on Saturday, at just about the same time of the November 11th crash, those hundreds of people gathered at that same intersection.
And it felt like something needed to happen sooner, and we wanted to hold some space for her. And
Shayla Diaz needed a moment. She was caught emotional as she looked up and saw those hundreds of people beginning to cross that intersection, which was lined with small candles.
Sorry.
The gathering made their way to Elm Grove Park, and that's where some wrote messages of love to Maura, others made friendship bracelets, and as twilight became evening, a moment of silence.
Like Maura, we will take care of one another. We'll be kind with every opportunity. Look at all the light shining around you. We're going to see ripple effects for generations as we collectively work to be our best for one another, for Maura. We're going to take a quiet moment now to reflect.
A formal memorial service will be held this coming Saturday at 11 a.m. at the Cathedral of the Rockies.
This time has been so special, and we're just so grateful for all of you. We love you so much. Thank you for joining us tonight.
And as you can tell, it's a tragedy that has shaken the community. And it comes at a time when traffic fatalities and serious injuries in Boise are at their highest levels in more than a decade. Now, because of the rise in these crashes, in 2023, the city and Ada County Highway District created the Vision Zero Task Force. The goal? Eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries through better street design, data-driven decisions, and community engagement. Now, one of the leaders of that effort is Boise City Council member Jimmy Halliburton, who's also the founder of the Boise Bicycle Project. And Jimmy is joining us now to talk about what's behind this trend and what solutions are on the table and how folks can get involved in the conversation. Jimmy, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Yeah, Gemma, thank you so much for having me on. I certainly, can't stand the circumstances that we're bringing us together to have this conversation, but I'm happy and thankful to be here to hopefully bring at least some sort of light and some sort of direction
Mhm.
on things that people can do. But like so many people in the community, I'm feeling that same heartbreak. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time a tragedy like this has happened in Boise, and it's not the first time that I've been involved with families who've experienced this sort of loss. And one of the things I want to make sure that I say is that I think that right now really is a great time for people to be there and supporting each other. And I'm so impressed and inspired by the neighbors who are standing up for Maura and her family. There are so many people that are hurting right now. Um, Nobody more than Maura's family, but also the other families who have lost people and lost their children in the last several years. Those
Mhm.
wounds never heal, and those wounds are wide open right now. And so I've spent a lot
Well,
of time, reaching out to some of these folks, and I just want to make sure that people know that like now is the time to be there for each other as we are moving forward.
yeah, absolutely. And Jimmy, as you said, crashes like this are not happening in isolation. Boise has seen more fatal and serious crashes recently than I think that we've seen in more than a decade. Do you think there is some type of trend that is driving this?
There's absolutely a trend, and I would say that it's not in isolation here in Boise. It's in Idaho and it's across the country. And actually,
Hmm.
there were some statistics that came out recently that showed that since we've been recording bicycle and pedestrian related fatalities since about the mid 70s, it hit its absolute lowest in 2010. And since 2010, it's gradually gone up. In 2020, it spiked, and in 2025, it reached its highest. And this is across the entire country. But if you look at that data across the entire country very closely mirrors what we're seeing here in Idaho, and it very closely mirrors what we're seeing in Boise. And so, what we're seeing here is not just a local problem, it's an issue that we're seeing across the state and across the country. And we're certainly feeling it right now more than ever.
You're part of what I mentioned is the Vision Zero Task Force, which for folks who may not be familiar with this, you're working to eliminate traffic deaths entirely. So, Jimmy, how do you explain Vision Zero to the average listener?
Yeah, so there's two different things here. I think there's Vision Zero, which is a resolution that I helped pass when I was first elected to city council. And then after Jaden was hit on 16th Street, hit and killed while riding a
Hmm.
skateboard, I helped create the Traffic Fatality Review Task Force. And those things are separate, but they certainly work together. The idea is that we treat traffic-related fatalities and injuries as preventable. In the past, I think, a lot of times we use this term accident, and accidents happen, and we, just sort of go along our way. And when we look at actual um, every single incident, there's a responsibility to go and say, what could have been done here that would have prevented this from happening? And maybe it's the infrastructure, maybe it's education, maybe it's enforcement, maybe it's a variety of different things, but what could have been done to prevent this from happening? And if we don't look at it as an accident, but we actually look at it as a system that can be addressed and changed, then the hope is to be able to create a better system in the way that we design our streets, a better system in the way that we educate people, whether that's drivers or pedestrians or cyclists, better ways that we look at doing things and try to prevent these types of things from happening again instead of throwing up our hands and saying, hey, this is an accident. So the Traffic
Hmm.
Fatality Review Task Force, it meets quarterly. One of the things that I noticed after Jaden's crash was that there are ACHD who actually runs and manages our roads in Ada County. That's unique for Boise. Um, Ada County goes and they'll examine what happened at a crash site. The Boise Police Department will examine what happened at a crash site. City council members will get involved, but we aren't always in the same room having the discussions at the same time, making sure that there's a shared understanding. And so the idea with the review task force was we'd get everybody in the room. We would look at every single traffic related fatality. Doesn't matter if it's pedestrian, bicycle, motorcycle, or car related, every single one, and try to figure out what are the contributing factors to each of these crashes. Are there any themes that we're seeing? How can we address the problems that are happening at this exact location? And what sort of similarities does this location have at other locations across the street that we need to address as well? So again, it's trying to create a better system in the way that we respond and proactively create change to address our traffic related fatalities that we see in the city.
Jimmy, I know one of the things that I've heard you and others mention is that Boise streets just were simply designed for a different era. Uh, Can you talk a little bit about how those past design decisions have impacted what is going on today?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't always realize, but the city of Boise doesn't own and manage its own streets. And we're very
Hmm.
unique in that way. We're one of the only major metropolitan areas in the country that doesn't own and manage its own streets. Instead, we have a county highway department that was created by state legislation that manages the streets for the entire county. And I would say, coming from the nonprofit sector and as a bicycle advocate, working with ACHD in the past was really challenging because the goal and sort of the primary objective always seemed, how can we move cars as fast as we possibly can across the entire city? And that was priority number one. And I think what you've seen recently is a major shift at ACHD to say, how can we move people safely? And that being the number one priority before we actually start talking about speed. And what that means is that for decades and decades and decades, our streets here in Boise, in Idaho, and you really saw a lot of other transportation organizations doing this across the United States, really focused on cars alone and moving cars quickly, oftentimes at the detriment of people walking and biking and the safety of the drivers themselves. So we see a
Hmm.
shift in the way that that is happening now. I would say that the partnership and the collaboration between Boise and ACHD is probably the best that it's ever been. I think that you see a highway department that is more responsive to the types of communities that the city is trying to create. And what we're trying to create at the city is a direct response of what our citizens are asking for. And so I think we see a highway department that is more responsive. But I also still think that you see a challenge of when there is an incident that happens like this last one with Mora. People are reaching out to the city and saying, hey, you have to do something. And then the city is saying, okay, ACHD, we have to do something. This level of bureaucracy, I think, sometimes makes it a challenge for both our community members to navigate, but also for our agencies to navigate. We've got two different levels of decision makers, two different budgets, sometimes different priorities. ACHD not only has to respond to Boise, they have to respond to, to Star and Eagle and Meridian. And so there are challenges with the system that we have here. I think that sometimes makes things happen a little bit slower. But I would also say that our current ACHD commission is the most responsive it's ever been, at least since I've been involved with bicycle and pedestrian advocacy.
So, Jimmy, the city and ACHD have been rolling out leading pedestrian intervals. This gives people who are walking a few seconds head start at intersections. So, I mean, on paper, this sounds really simple, but why is this such a big deal in practice?
So this was actually in response to a gentleman that was hit and killed when crossing State and 11th Street by the YMCA a few years ago. A lot of times, what will happen is that because you have large and larger vehicles that we see, especially here in Idaho, and pedestrians are oftentimes a little bit smaller. When there is a crash, usually what you'll hear people say is like, "Oh, I didn't see them." And when we
Hmm.
have leading pedestrian intervals, it actually gets people into a more visible space quicker. So if you're out in the intersection before the vehicles start turning into the intersection, you can probably see them really quicker, much quicker than if they're standing behind the vehicle in a blind spot. And so you see those leading pedestrian intervals actually get people into a spot that is more visible quicker. And the same thing happens when you have things like bulb outs or curb extensions, where instead of again standing behind, you're standing a little bit closer to the intersection. So it's more about the sight lines. And people aren't going to hit somebody if they can see them. So it's all about figuring out ways to make folks more visible. But that was direct response to another individual that was hit and killed not too long ago.
So, Jimmy, you founded the Boise Bicycle Project. You have been advocating for safer streets for an incredibly long time. How has that experience shaped how you look at these crashes, but also the solutions that are needed to make sure that we alleviate them?
Well, so when I was at the Bike Project, I think that we donated over 10,000 bicycles to kids. A lot of them at our huge Holiday Kids Bike giveaway. And BDP this year is going to donate another 600 bikes to kids. And when we were giving those bikes to kids, there also became a responsibility to make sure that those kids had safe places to ride. And what we would find is that oftentimes the kids that were receiving our bicycles were in lower income parts of Boise and often in areas with less infrastructure than others. So you can think of our downtown and sometimes our north end area having, more sidewalks, more bike lanes. Well, a lot of the kids that we were getting bikes to were living in areas that had no sidewalks at all, no
Mm.
crosswalks whatsoever, higher speed limits. And so really got involved in advocacy at that level. And so now when these things happen, I know some of these kids. We've had adults that have been hit and killed that were riding BBP bicycles. I go and I teach bicycle safety to all of our different schools, and some of our other nonprofit partners, like Safe Routes to School, does that as well. We know these kids well, and we've probably taught them before, and so it's a very personal issue, and we take that seriously. And unfortunately, when there is a tragic thing like this happens, we typically do get really involved with those families because we want to make sure that we're working with them and trying to provide some sort of resource and support, but also help to them if they want to try to create change.
Hmm.
I think what we see happening right now in the North End is we've got a lot of people who are hurting, especially when something happens to a kid. We can all identify with that. And so
Oh, yeah.
people are wanting to see changes. They're wanting to see changes on Harrison. They're wanting to see changes on 15th and 13th, some of the busier roads. And as the Treasure Valley grows, it's not just Boise, but as Eagle and Meridian grows, we have more traffic coming through our neighborhoods all the time. And it's certainly happening in the North End, but it's happening in every single neighborhood in Boise. And people are feeling like their streets are not safe. And when you see incidents like this happen, like you cannot blame people for thinking that there's more traffic than there's ever been before, and there needs to be a sense of urgency in addressing that sort of traffic safety. And so I've got a lot of folks reaching out right now from the North End, and I'm glad that they are, and they're proposing solutions and ideas. And we'll be taking a look at every single one of those. We'll be looking at how we can reduce speed limits in those areas. But you can't just change the speed limit on the sign. You actually have to change the road design. People are going to go whatever
Hmm.
speed the road kind of feels comfortable. So if it's a really wide three-lane road, you're going to drive really fast. But if it's a narrow road that has bulb outs and curb extensions and crosswalks and trees, people are going to go a little bit slower. So we're going to be working with them. And one of the things that I just don't want to lose sight of, everybody is hurting right now with the loss of Mora, but we've lost 4 kids in the last 2 years,
Mm.
and we've lost kids all across the city of Boise. And when we're talking about this issue, yes, we need to be fixing some problems that we see on Harrison and 15th Street, but we cannot lose sight that streets like Collister don't have a single sidewalk on it. Or streets like Nez Perce, where another kid was hit, don't have
Hmm.
crosswalks or lit signals to get across those. This has to be part of a bigger issue and a bigger effort to make sure that no matter where you live in our city, that you have this level of infrastructure to walk and bike to schools, to parks, to these places that you need to go. And so we need to make sure that we do have that commitment. And I really do think that there are things that we can do, things that we are doing at the city of Boise, that we're doing at ACHD. But we need to be asking the state of Idaho at the same time because they've created laws that have made it harder for us to make these changes. And we need their help from a budgetary standpoint. We need their help from a standpoint of making sure that we've got the tools and laws that allow us to build the roads that our community members want. And what we actually see is some of those things being taken away. So we need that pressure at the local level. I hope people keep reaching out to me, but I hope that they reach out to their state representatives as well, because this is a much, much bigger issue and it needs all hands on deck if we're going to address it.
Mhm. And Jimmy, you mentioned the partnership between the city of Boise and the Ada County Highway District. And again, I think it's important that we reiterate the fact that Boise does not control its roads. I think that's critically important for people to understand. This is unique to Boise, as you said. And because of that, there are layers that happen. You said bureaucracy, and you said the partnership is good right now. How would you describe that collaboration, and where do you really feel that the collaboration is working well right now?
Well, I do think that ACHD responds to these crashes in meaningful ways. I think the hard part is they've got decades of bad road design that they have to fix, and they've got priority projects across the city. The relationship that we have with ACHD gives the city of Boise the opportunity to make some of our own recommendations for our priorities. So we can put things at the top of the list. So right now, State Street would actually has some of the most crashes that we see, pedestrian, bicycle, car-related, is our highest priority to make sure that we're redesigning State Street, where we know from data-driven but also anecdotal situations that this is a dangerous street for people to be on. Collister is at the top of our list because we know that that whole street doesn't have sidewalks and there's kids walking to school every single day. And so we have the ability to put priority projects forward to ACHD to let them know what we want to see. But then ACHD has more mechanisms to be doing other projects across the entire city. So while we can put some pressure on them to say what our priorities are, it's really up to them, and it's up to their budget and their ability to make sure that they're doing this across the huge county. And I think that that's hard for people to see because we want to have change happen immediately, but sometimes change in one location means that another location gets pushed further down the line. And really what we need is more dedicated bicycle and pedestrian funding to address these things across the board. That can come from the state, that can come from the federal level. Currently, the federal level is telling us that they want to put forward a transportation bill that includes zero funding for walking and biking. And these are all things that have cascading effects. So we have to be pushing at all levels, at federal levels, at state levels, to make sure that ACHD and the city of Boise actually have the resources they need to put things on the ground that are going to save people's lives. And I do think that ACHD is doing a good job. I think they're doing the best that they've ever done. I certainly think that there's always more that we can do. But I also know that, resources can be limited and we have to be pushing hard. And I think neighborhoods are doing that right now. And the more that they can push at a local level, but also as a state level, I think the more opportunities we'll have to address these things faster.
So, Jimmy, I have less than a minute left with you, but you mentioned the state and the state law hindering certain things. 11th and State Street, this is where the downtown YMCA is. You mentioned there was a fatal crash there with a pedestrian as well. The new design phase has stalled. ACHD has its hands tied. They cannot do anything because of a new law that would have narrowed that roadway to 3 lanes with shared use paths for pedestrian and cyclists. I'm on that street every single day. It's a dangerous section of road. Very quickly, what can the average person do, even when it comes to the fact that you can't do anything at the city level? ACHD cannot do anything as well, but this does need to change.
I mean, we have to have folks reaching out at the state level because what we're seeing is as we're trying to make our streets more bicycle and pedestrian friendly, the state is coming after those measures. They're trying to take them away and they're trying to keep a traditional car-centric, form of transportation. We're losing work that we were trying to do on State Street that we thought would have saved lives. We have a project halfway complete on 8th Street that we're not going to be able to extend another 4 blocks because of legislation that was put forward last year. The state legislator took our ability away to have red light cameras in school zones that would have made it possible for us to increase ticketing for people running red lights in school zones, the kind of incident that killed Jaden a few years ago. And so the state is making it challenging for us to do these things. We're in there, we're advocating, but community members have to do that as well. And it can't be just Boise, it has to be folks across the state. And I think that we need to understand that it doesn't matter who you are, where you live, people want to be able to walk in their neighborhood and be able to do that safely. And so we need people reaching out to our state legislators to help us fight for these measures that will make our neighborhoods safe for all types of road users.
Jimmy, I want to thank you so much for the conversation today. Really appreciate it. We've been speaking with Boise City Council member and the founder of the Boise Bicycle Project, Jimmy Halliburton. We've been discussing last week's fatal crash in the north end of Boise that took the life of an 8-year-old, but we've also been discussing ways to move forward to make our streets safer for everyone, no matter where you live in Idaho. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.